welcome everyone. It looks like folks are still getting connected to audio, so I'll give everyone a moment to get their audio connected, get settled. I'm going to start sharing the presentation. Welcome again for those who maybe couldn't hear me when I first welcomed you. So excited for everyone to be here for our final session. I think it's going to be a great session. Basically, we're talking about putting it all together. We're reviewing some of the stuff that we've talked about already, talking about action plans, and then we have a bunch of time for peer discussion and planning for next steps. So it looks like everyone who's on is connected to audio, so I'll get started, and of course folks can join as they get connected, and you all know the top of it is always a little bit of repetition, so it's all right if folks miss the top of that. So again, welcome. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for being part of this learning collaborative through all the sessions. As I mentioned, we're going to just go over putting it all together, implementing some of these action plans and what the next steps are. As you know, after all these sessions, your hosts are Suzanne, who's not here today, myself, Helen Ravernier, I use she, her pronouns, and Mariah is our tech wizard, helping everything in the background. If you have any problems on the Learning Collaborative session or with the dashboard or anything like that, you can reach out to Mariah and she will get you sorted out. I'm not going to go through all of this because, again, you all already know it, but just as a reminder, we are recording this and it will be posted to the discussion board along with the slides, so you'll have those accessible. You can always put questions in the chat box or unmute yourself. We feel free to, interject, interrupt. We're always around for that. And of course, as a reminder, please complete the evaluation at the end. Again, this is stuff you all know here in the final session, but just a reminder that as a learning collaborative, we're all here to learn from our materials, etc. Share with our peers and colleagues, and then leave with new ideas and updated processes. And it is this interwoven process of learning and growing and having questions each time and setting some things into motion. And then again, we have all of our tools. We've got this kind of session. We've got our assignments and resources. There's not an assignment for this session because it's our last one, but you've had assignments throughout. And then we have that discussion board access, which you'll continue to have access to. And we'll do a 3 to 6 month follow-up, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the session. So for today's agenda, we'll do an icebreaker as usual. I'll go over, a high-level summary of the Learning Collaborative content. Then we'll talk about implementing action plans, as I mentioned, and then we'll have sort of a large group discussion about what are our takeaways, what are any surprises we're having, any challenges moving forward, etc. So as usual, we'll start with this icebreaker. You all know the drill. You can pull it up using that QR code and your smartphone, or you can go to menti.com and put in 1517456 and in just a moment, I will put that link in the chat as well. I'll give everyone just one more second. All right, now I'm gonna put it in the chat really quickly. Oh, yeah, and Mariah put the code and stuff, and then this one that I'm putting in should just lead you directly there. And so with that, I'm going to share our results. So our first icebreaker question is, what's your favorite media that you engaged with over the last year? So your favorite show or podcast or book or movie, or I like this answer, YouTube. I always, I've been hearing more and more that it's something that people are just like on the tube, which is great. Some football, great. You can also, of course, just unmute and share. I'm trying to think. I usually read a lot of books, and this year I just really have not. But I did read a great book called Poison for Breakfast. That's by Lemony Snicket, so the guy who did the series of Unfortunate Events. But this one's for adults. Like the book sort of grew up with his audience, and yeah, anyway, that's my recommendation. We've also got an ego-free leadership book. That's cool. Crucial Conversations book, Mel Robbins podcast, Atlas 6, some reality TV, YouTube for Learning, Bible in a Year podcast. Awesome. Yeah, we've all been engaging in cool stuff. All right, our next icebreaker question is, what's your most used emoji? And if you're on your phone, you should be able to just submit an emoji. And if not, I don't know, you can try describing it. I think mine is probably the 100 sign. We've got some good laughter. That is awesome. That's showing that we're having good times, and more laughter. Great. Okay, according to this is my work phone. The two most for me, I should just be filling it out, are the like smiley face with blushings and the 100 symbol. So, all right, we've got some rolling our eyes, some things are awkward, some face palms. Nice. All right, we're running the gamut, but yeah, I think this is a funny one. Laughing with eyes closed and tears. Yep, similar. All right, nice. And then this is for later. All right, so that's fun icebreakers. Now we know more about ourselves and our cohort. All right, so with that, I hope that helped you feel in the group and feel like you're, knowing the folks you're around. And now I'm just gonna, again, go over a high-level summary of the Learning Collaborative. And I'm not gonna read through every point on every slide, but I do want you to have them in case you ever need to just like sort of go back and be like, what did we talk about session one, without looking at the entire PowerPoint of session one, which of course you would be welcome to do and you'll always have access to. So that is also an option. But yeah, in session one, we really laid that foundation. We talked about how workforce is the fuel for a successful health center. We talked about what the definition of a staff satisfaction survey is and sort of some of the semantics around that. And how, it's mostly about what kinds of questions you ask that determine that, but being thoughtful about, what you want to get out of it is sort of what determines what you're going to call it. Then we talked about some of the factors that influence employee satisfaction and why conducting a staff satisfaction or employee engagement survey is important. We talked about different data sources and some initial considerations. And as a reminder, some of the why that we talked about are that this carefully designed and conducted employee survey can really reveal a great deal of information about the perceptions that your employees have. And then management can use those to improve the workplace. Of course, we talked about organizational responsiveness to employee feedback, leading to higher retention rates, lower absenteeism, improved productivity, better customer service, and higher employee morale. And the simple fact that the organization is conducting a survey can send a positive message to employees that their opinions are valued. But of course, there needs to be follow-up and response to those surveys. We talked about managers gaining insights into issues affecting their departments that allowed them to manage more effectively. Again, we talked about if the senior management team isn't fully committed and ready to really listen to, and most importantly, act on what employees were saying, then conducting the survey could really falsely raise those expectations among employees, leading to problems with employee relations. So that was some of the stuff we talked about in session one. As a reminder, in session two, we had our guest speaker, Sarah Hens, and she discussed considerations for rolling out staff satisfaction surveys. She included that folks should be thinking about what their goals are, what the tools they needed for success were, questions to include, how one could encourage participation, thinking about timing and frequency, and some best practices. And as a reminder, some notes on questions to include were not asking about issues or items that your organization is not going to address, focusing on behaviors or impacts, not feelings, using standardized response skills like a Likert scale, focusing on closed-ended questions, and determining if collecting demographics was important, and then also the importance of testing your survey before releasing it to your staff. And then on the third session, we had another guest speaker, Tammy Green, who now has a consulting organization, but was the CEO of Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center in Alaska for a while. And so she talked about engaging organizational leadership and focusing on those key factors that are associated with engagement or satisfaction and socializing them with leaders, linking them to the organization's mission. So creating that culture that was open to a staff satisfaction survey included making sure that there was leadership buy-in at sort of all levels of leadership. Of course, she was the CEO, but making sure that managers and other folks at director level were bought into this. And linking it back to the organization's mission, she talked about productivity, retention, absenteeism and presenteeism, and the ability to recruit top talent. She also really emphasized the importance of designing measurement strategies that are meaningful and actionable, and not strictly transactional. I remember we really felt like her notes on making things transformational over transactional was really powerful piece of her presentation. And then in terms of survey methods, she focused on that holistic employee engagement and satisfaction concepts, including total rewards, leadership, learning and development, workplace culture, etc. And then she used best practice questions and measurement methodology to produce those actionable results regarding the extrinsic and intrinsic factors. And she had those two question sets, both the employee engagement questions and the employee satisfaction questions, the first of which were delivered quarterly and the second of which were included annually. And those also included the employee engagement questions. And a note on that, I know it's in the PowerPoint that she had, but I also just wanted to let folks know, because I know one comment we've gotten a lot in this and the previous Learning Collaborative on this subject was like, I just want questions. And so I took the questions that Tammy and her organization had created and said, like, you all are welcome to use, and I put them in a Word document, and I'll be loading them onto the dashboard later. So y'all can just download those and use them if, use what of those questions resonate with you. And then she also talked about the response and how to process some of the goals and the responses. So she talked about reliably following through on timing for those quarterly and annual survey questions. She talked about continuing to ensure that employees feel safe in giving honest answers by really maintaining that confidentiality and the humble curiosity regarding critical feedback. And then she focused on looking at trends over time to guide organizational priorities and needs, and avoiding reactive decisions based on limited information or those like point in time frustrations that may not be representative of the larger staff group's needs. So yeah, some of those were some of her highlights and the lessons from the road. And then just 2 weeks ago in the previous session, Suzanne discussed the basics of the what, why, who, how, and timing and frequency of stay interviews as an option, not for replacing, but for augmenting your staff satisfaction surveys. So, maybe the quarterly pulse surveys don't work for you, and you want to do an annual one and then an annual stay interview with every employee. So it's important to think about exactly what your stay interview is. Of course, that structured discussion, preferably with a supervisor, so that those supervisors can learn the specific actions that they need to take to strengthen employees' engagement and retention. The why is very similar to why conduct staff satisfaction surveys. It can really bring information in, it can improve retention, but the difference with a stay interview is that there is that individual conversation happening. And then again, as I mentioned, in the best circumstance, it should be supervisors conducting those interviews, but sometimes it makes more sense for HR. Some of the basic how skills are to be listening 80% of the time, probing to learn more, and of course taking notes. And then she discussed the frequency was every 6 months for the first year, and then after that annually. And then finally, Suzanne discussed some of the other alternatives or additions that folks could take, including business team building activities, different department meetings, town hall meetings, focus groups, effective onboarding processes, and exit interviews as well. And many of these really offer an opportunity for staff to participate in a conversation with leadership to share feedback, opinions, and solutions for consideration. So that's all that we talked about in a very high level way across these previous 4 sessions. Before I go on to thinking about implementing action plans, does anyone have any comments or questions or anything like that? Don't see anything in the chat. Okay. All right. Well, of course, there will be more time for comments, questions, and discussion later on. So now I want to talk about implementing action plans. And this part is really like, we've done a lot of learning, we've done a lot of thinking, but now it's time to take action. And I know a lot of folks in this cohort have already done staff satisfaction surveys. So whether your next action is to do one or respond to it, it's important to think about how you're going to plan to make sure that those next steps happen. So what is action planning? Action planning is an approach rather than a specific method, and it really helps focus ideas and decide what steps you need to take to achieve those particular goals. It's a statement of what you want to achieve over a given period of time. Preparing an action plan is a good way to help reach objectives. And of course, this can apply to an organization level, or as we as individuals can make action plans for our own individual goals. And an effective action plan should really give a definite timetable and a set of clearly defined steps. And for each objective, there should be a separate action plan. So the steps are to define your problem, evaluate the situation. So have all the possibilities been considered? In this stage, you're really exploring all the possibilities, asking everyone who's involved or interested for their input in identifying the problem. And is there just one problem or are there multiple problems? And then you want to collect and analyze the data. So once you've identified the problem, we collect and analyze the data to prove or disprove the assumption that our problem is a result of inconsistency or whatever the assumption is. And then we analyze those situations by asking questions. So then you clarify and prioritize the problem. So if there's more than one problem, you'll need to prioritize the problem so you can focus on the most important problems first, and then ask some questions to really help you sort the problems with higher priority issues at the top of the list. Then, of course, you want to write a goal statement for each solution. And the next step in that process is to set SMART goals. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. And then the team needs to go through the problems that have been identified and evaluate them for each of those items. And if all the goals have been set, our SMART goals, great, then you're ready to move on to the monitoring process. Otherwise, you need to work with your team to make the necessary adjustments to really make those goals SMART goals. And again, we'll talk about SMART goals later. And then the next step, of course, is to implement your solutions, which is the action plan. So step 5 is to write an action plan and address the problems. An action plan is written so that any employee, of course, within reason, could do the task successfully alone, and is followed much like a recipe is a good way to think of it. So it converts the goal or plan into a people process and has 3 essential parts. So based on the goal, the action plan answers those 5 questions: the what, when, how, where, and who. It lists the resources and it lists potential barriers. And then you monitor and evaluate. So our next step in the problem solving process is to design a method for monitoring the outcome. And the method we select should really assess whether the goal and action plan corrects the problem. Of course, in addition, a well-designed monitoring method will really help the team to determine when the action plan needs to be improved or updated in any way. And then a team of professionals, the folks on your team, shouldn't spend time going over numerous data sets. They really need to have simple spreadsheets. You have your data from your staff satisfaction survey, or you have whatever data you have, and you don't need to spend so much time utilizing the data. Mostly you just need to get down to business, and a big part of this too is seeing how well the action plan is really working, and if it's not working, thinking about tweaking it to make it better. And then, of course, the final but also first step is to restart with a new problem or refine an old problem. So the problem solving steps are cyclical. If the first cycle is successful and the process starts over with a new problem, if the same problem persists, there must be refinement so that the process starts over with the refinement of the original problem as a more current data is analyzed. And the problem solving process can really last minutes or extend to years, depending on the difficulty and complexity of the problem being addressed. Of course, this is general information about action planning with staff satisfaction surveys, and specifically, of course, it should neither take minutes nor years. It's more of a across several months kind of a situation. So with all that information, that was about action planning, but an action plan is a documented strategy for solving a problem, quite simply. And an action plan can also be known as a statement of work or a study plan. But at the very basic, the action plan is a documentation of what tasks will be done, by whom, and when. And the action plan really helps you manage the project and maintain focus on that goal. An action plan really should include those areas for gaps and barriers, opportunities, strategies for improvement, and your timeline. I cannot stress enough how important a timeline is. And like I said, your strategies and your goals really need to be SMART. So that stands for specific, which is narrow and focused. Measurable, can they be tracked? Are they attainable? Can they actually be something that are worked toward and be accomplished? Realistic, kind of along the lines of attainable, but can this actually be done? And timely. Again, you got to give yourself and your team a deadline. So that is some baseline, like here's what we've covered, here's how you do action planning, and next we're going to have a group discussion. So of course we want to talk about a bunch of different things. I'm going to open up some Mentimeters, but I also want to say, even though the Menti is open, I really, really welcome folks unmuting and answering these questions out loud or putting things in the chat. So you should be able to go back to that same Mentimeter. If you need to re-pull it up, you can, of course, use that same QR code and the link that's in the chat already. I'll repost it in case anyone has joined late. So I'll give everyone another moment and then we'll go there. But again, highly encourage folks to, I'm gonna make that full screen first, to unmute themselves, put anything you need in the chat. Okay, share screen. Oh,
Please put the numbers again.
yeah, so they're 15174560.
15174560.
So the top takeaways from this learning collaborative, we've got actionable and direct questions. That's great. An action plan, the benefit of stay interviews. That's great. I'm a huge proponent of stay interviews. So even though I couldn't be here for that session, I was really glad that that was something that was talked about. Any other top takeaways that folks are getting from this learning collaborative? Again, stay interviews. That's great that that session was had that impact. And of course, again, as we talked about at the beginning, one of the things that you can access as part of this learning collaborative is direct technical assistance. So if anyone has any questions about stay interviews or wants to like practice anything or anything like that, like feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk more about stay interviews. The action plan described today, thanks. Examples of questions and categories, the difference between engagement and satisfaction. Stay interviews. The importance of reporting back to staff for sure. And yeah, those different ways to share results. Awesome. Okay, cool. And then what information, if any, surprised you in this learning collaborative? The name stay surveys, yeah, or stay interviews. Cool. Again, I think that that helps focus people in on like, we want you. We're doing this because we want to figure out how to keep you. I think that in and of itself is really important messaging for staff. engagement is not satisfaction and vice versa. Yeah. Stay interviews, or stay surveys. Yeah. Cool. Okay. And our next question is, what are some of the greatest challenges that you think you might face in terms of implementing and responding to a staff I'm really struggling with the word satisfaction today. Staff satisfaction survey. And for those of you who have already done a staff satisfaction survey, are there any challenges you already face that will be worth, that you want to share with folks? And any we can sort of think about and talk through how to face those challenges or barriers. Yeah. Yeah, I think thinking about how to get those response rates is really critical. I don't know if anyone who's already conducted one and had some success with that wants to share how they encouraged folks or anything like that. Helping leadership understand the importance of using those results. Yeah, for sure. And the capacity to respond to all the written comments. That's fair. Action items that can be accomplished and getting support from upper management to implement change. And leadership utilization of days. Yep. Yeah, I think all of these are really important. Leadership use of data. I do think, in terms of like, this is a HRSA priority, and part of that is going to come down in this national staff satisfaction survey. And so, like, it's so often I feel like we see HRSA like tell folks that they're interested in a thing for a long time to sort of get them warmed up to the idea, and then they start requiring it. And so as much as like we shouldn't just do these things because HRSA wants us to, like that can be an argument to use with leadership of like, this is important to HRSA, and HRSA is our big funder, and so eventually it's probably going to become a requirement. So why don't we get a jump on it? Why don't we start to learn the process? And then, as we've talked about in this, and as you all know, turnover is really expensive. And so thinking about the ways that you can invest the money that you would be spending on turnover in retention strategies it's a good use of money. And like, so often we hear that that is, the argument that leadership needs to hear. I know we also have some folks in the C-suite on this call. So I don't know, obviously, like you don't need to be convinced or maybe not on this call, but in the cohort. So if anyone who's in a C-suite position wants to share, like what would convince them, we're always open to that. If they weren't already convinced, again, because they're here. No pressure. All right. If you feel the inspiration. So again, sort of along those same lines, what are some of the strategies that you are already thinking of to address those challenges? What's already coming to mind as you think about getting that leadership buy-in, getting leadership to use the data, or make sure that staff have the opportunity and the time to respond? How are you thinking about ensuring that you're getting those responses? If you don't have ideas, maybe we haven't done our job right. Any thoughts? Is anyone thinking of doing like incentives around getting responses, doing like a gift card drawing if folks submit their staff satisfaction survey or anything like that. Oh, someone is entering information into, you're welcome to just type stuff into the chat or unmute. Sometimes technology works against us. All right, well, I think that the resounding silence says a lot. Tying I really can't say it. Staff satisfaction issues to other problems that we face. Yeah, that makes sense. Being more selective with the questions on the survey, that makes sense. Providing leaflets with solution and response ideas. Okay, all right, they're coming in. Yeah, so I know some of that goes to, especially again, if you've done one before and you're gearing up to do another one, thinking about how you can respond so that folks know that it matters and that like you're actually hearing what they're saying. I like the idea of leaflets so that, yeah, folks can read it on their own time, etc. Nice. Okay, that makes sense. So, okay, this sort of gets at the next step of the Learning Collaborative is in 3 to 6 months. We're going to do a follow-up both in survey format and we're going to host a little, get together of the same nature. So what do you need in the next 3 to 6 months to really begin to implement a staff satisfaction survey if you haven't already, if that's your goal, or respond to one if that's your goal? What do you need? And part of this is to help you identify that for yourself so that then you can seek those out. And part of it is for us to know so that we can work to be providing those in the discussion or the discussion board or as TA in any way. Well, let me ask this, because we asked it at the beginning, but I don't think I've heard recently more staff in HR. Yeah, that's real and tough. Map staff satisfaction issues to other problems we face. I will emphasize the role leadership actions are needed. Yeah. So my other question, and this one I don't have a Mentimeter for, so just put it in the chat or feel free to unmute, but where are folks in the process? Like, I know at the beginning we talked about many of you had done staff satisfaction surveys, but has anyone like started to conduct one since the staff satisfaction survey learning collaborative began or anything like that? And I also see we've got more staff and affordable housing in town. Yep, and time to do it. Yeah, so has anything changed about where folks are in the process? We've got Ashley's new to their organization, so currently reviewing an old staff satisfaction to plan and move forward. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, all right. And then I think I have another, nope, that's it. Okay, so that's the end of that guy. I do have some other questions, and these ones are not in Mentimeter form, so you're gonna have to interact with me. So some of my other questions are, oh, where did they go? So what are your plans following this learning collaborative? We've heard from Ashley that they're going to review this old one and start looking at a plan. But what are folks' plans in terms of implementing a staff satisfaction survey? Or again, I know a bunch of folks on the call were working towards responding to a staff satisfaction survey. So what plans do you already have in place? We've got Christine says none since this collaborative, but it's annual or new. So they'll be discussing with the C-suite the benefits of stay interviews. Awesome. That's a great plan. Cool. Anything else? What are folks planning? How are you preparing for this? working with a healthcare management intern to trend and theme previous qualitative responses. That's awesome. Yeah, we'd love to, maybe at the 3 to 6 month follow-up, Cord, you can share any information that came from that. And then, yeah, compare those with the new year. That's really awesome. Cord, if you don't mind sharing, is that like the intern is like listening to, or looking at notes and like putting them into categories? Is that how they're doing, or are they doing that?
So we'll give her the last 3 years of surveys completed by our outside surveyor, or maybe it's only 2 years, but something like that, 2 or 3 years. And they will come through the questions that had comment responses. And yeah, kind of theme it based on what was brought up, and then we can see if anything's changed over those 3 years, or do we keep seeing the same stuff come up, and then look at that compared to the same responses on the new year when those go out.
Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, again, at the 3 to 6 month follow-up, I'd love to hear more about that. We've also got in the chat reviewing current survey results or actionable items and review questions to see if you want to change any. Yep, I think that's a great idea. I'm requesting a display space for those positive outcomes. Again, I think that makes a lot of sense and is a great call. So, and this one is, again, I'd love to know, but also for you to start thinking about, or you've already thought about it, but who on your team are you hoping to really get help or support or buy-in from, and how do you plan to engage those folks? So like Cord mentioned this intern, anyone else have thoughts about who they'll be asking for help? And also in the chat, we're in the process of responding to the survey. It's been on pause for the past 2 months, and we'll be revisiting it again in the next month, and we'll revise the previous survey next year using information learned in this learning collaborative. That's great. Yeah, okay, that's a cool place to be in, is like you've got the data, you're ready to start responding, and yeah, that's a great time. But yeah, who on your team are folks, tapping to be part of it? An engagement committee that's responsible for the survey? That's really cool. Yeah, I think Maggie, did we talk about this already, that your engagement committee? That sounds familiar. Maybe not. Do you want to tell us about your engagement committee and like who's on it and how they got chosen and stuff like that?
Well, I don't know how it got chosen because I just inherited it when I came on board a year ago. But it does involve chiefs and managers and directors. And it's from all aspects of the company. So we have some clinical people, some administrative corporate people, and of course we have the CFO who says yay or nay to, things. No, that costs too much money. Oh, okay, I'll give in. So that's, and we meet monthly. And so we did meet to talk about the results, because we did ours in June. But we haven't really done anything, I guess, or responded to it really. We've gone over the results a couple times to make sure people have seen it, but we haven't really done any action items from that yet.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's really cool that there is that group, and like you said, that it's across all different parts of the organization. So yeah, I'm glad that you have that. That's a really cool option that folks could maybe use. We've also got in the chat an executive council, so thinking about that. Nice. All right, well, those are my questions for y'all as we start to think about what's going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months. And then I want to open up the floor after I read this comment from Stephanie that there's an engagement team. We're including managers as well as other personnel not in management to allow them to feel empowered. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea too of again, like including folks from different roles and levels and different parts of the organization to make sure that there's that buy-in, because of course we talk so much about leadership buy-in, but we need all staff at all levels to believe in it and be bought in and feel comfortable sharing their answers. So that's awesome. So yeah, now I want to open the floor to what questions do you have either for me, for the ACU Star Center team, anything that came up. Of course, I can reach out to Tammy and Sarah about anything, and any questions for each other. This, part of the collaborative part of Learning Collaborative is that we're learning from our peers and colleagues as well as subject matter experts. All right, I'm very comfortable sitting in silence, but that seems like maybe you truly don't have questions for each other. So with that, I'll go on to what sort of our next steps are, and what we hope that you can be thinking about. So as I've mentioned many times now, we'll be conducting a 3 to 6 month follow-up. So we'll be following up with you in 3 to 6 months. Can't tell you when exactly now. But it'll be sometime between February 15th and May 17th. We will send out a survey that we really, really hope that you fill out. And we'll also be offering an opportunity like this one, shorter, we'll set aside 45 minutes to just check in, see where you are, see if there's any support we could offer you at this point, see if there's any lessons learned within those 3 to 6 months. Maybe we'll hear from Cord about any trends that came up and how that, looking at that qualitative data went, et cetera. And yeah, like I said, we'll be checking in on that progress and how you're either implementing or responding. Again, as part of this Learning Collaborative, we are hoping that you'll be implementing or updating 3 policies and procedures as a response to the information gathered in those staff satisfaction surveys. And this doesn't have to be a huge deal. Even a lot of you said you'll be reviewing the questions that you utilize. That is updating a procedure. But we do want to check in on what your progress is on that and how, like I said, if there's any way we can support you to make sure that that is happening. As a final reminder about, you can always access that discussion board. All the resources will be there as they have been this whole time. And they'll be there forever. You can always access them, always access the slides, the recordings. Like I said, I'll be putting up that list of questions from Tammy Green, and I'll also add an article with some, the word is totally escaping me. I'm having aphasia. Funnily enough, when I never forget the word aphasia. Benchmarked data, that's not the word I'm looking for, but questions for health center staff on this. It's not questions we came up with, but it is like peer-reviewed article on this. So I'll put those 2 resources up there if you want to, as you're thinking about questions to add or subtract from the list. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you could fill out the evaluation for today's session. Of course, it was a little shorter. We, reviewed a lot, and mostly I just asked you questions. I do appreciate all your participation in the mentees and in the chat. I think that's really good stuff for me to learn and think about. So while that's up and you're thinking about that, I also want to just remind you that the Star Center always has new offerings and opportunities and resources. And we've got 2 upcoming events. One is the introduction to our new resource, the Organizational Leadership and Resiliency Toolkit. The toolkit is not published yet, but it is soon to be published. And this will be a review of its contents. We have 2 great subject matter experts, April Lewis and Matt Bennett. I feel like in the HR workforce side of the Health Center program have definitely heard from them. So if you've heard from them, you know that they're great, enthusiastic, they definitely both bring a smile to my face anytime I get the chance to talk to them or hear from them. So they'll be presenting that on Thursday, the 17th, so just in a couple of days. And then on the 30th, we have a trauma-informed leadership webinar. So thinking about how, as leaders, we can know that, we talk so much about trauma-informed care for patients, but we as an entire population have gone through a huge trauma with the pandemic. And so thinking, and then of course, like individuals that work with us and for us have traumas that we don't know. And so thinking about how we can be leaders with that lens and with that gentleness and that understanding of how to lead people effectively to productivity, but with a trauma-informed leadership lens. And then I believe we've already talked about this in the Learning Collaborative, but I just want to plug again that the Star Center recently published the Comprehensive Workforce Plan Template. It's an update to the resource that was formerly known as the Recruitment and Retention Plan Toolkit, but it includes instructions, a template, and an action plan all in one document. And of course, as you're going through, you can, just pull out the template part. When you get these slides, this image is hyperlinked, so you can just click that and it'll take you right there. Personally, I think it's great. We worked really hard on it. And again, it has all the wonderful things that the Retention and Recruitment Plan Template and Toolkit had, but just a lot of updated information, updated numbers. There's more of a Jedi lens to it, and it is not solely focused on retention and recruitment of providers or recruitment of providers. So that's a great resource I want to make sure that people know about. As I believe you have heard me mention over and over again, we have, all kinds of ways that folks can learn. So this slide I think you've seen, but feel free to check out our self-paced courses. We're adding new ones. We add new ones about every 6 months. So there's that. And then we have our podcast series. There are 3 seasons out now, and the 4th season is coming soon shortly. And then, of course, feel free to get in touch with us. As I said, we're here to do that ongoing TTA or technical assistance, mostly, I guess, of like if you want to, ask us any specifics, like I said, about stay interviews or about the wording for any questions or anything like that. We're around and available to talk through things with you on that one-on-one basis, either again over email or feel free to reach out and we can have a conversation or a Zoom call, etc. So with all that, are there any questions that have come up since I initially posed that? Again, these can be questions for me or Mariah. Mariah would mostly be about tech stuff. Not that she doesn't have tons and tons of expertise in lots of things, but yes, Catherine, what?
While we've had these sessions, when the first time I'd ever heard the term stay interview, it occurred to me that something that our leadership members have gone through was very similar to a stay interview. And we later learned after that process had concluded that one of our fellow team members he felt that the way it came across to him was very threatening. And I don't know if it's just the way the questions were asked of him or whatever, but it wasn't a positive thing because it actually ended up he actually resigned.
Oh, wow.
And again, it wasn't presented as this is a stay interview, we're trying to get information, whatever. It was everyone on the leadership team was going through this process and quote unquote difficult decisions were going to be made and some reorganization was going to happen. Now, our CEO explained when he brought this to his attention upon resigning, he said that was never the intention for anybody to feel at risk or whatever, but it really made him very uncomfortable. And again, it wasn't maybe completely a stay interview, but it very much sounded like it followed the same format, when maybe a bit more inquisitiveness on a direct level about specific position of each one of us that underwent the process. So I think it would be helpful to know what are the best ways of lessening the risk factor in a way for people that are going to participate in these, so that somebody doesn't get the wrong idea as he did. And granted, the language was a little bit, I don't want to use the word coded, but I can't think of another word. I mean, it did kind of sound somewhat, okay, what's going to happen with this? So I think it would be helpful to have some information as to how to lessen that for folks, so
Yeah.
that they don't get the wrong idea, etc.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's hugely unfortunate that was the result. It sounds like I kind of understand. It's, the idea of prefacing something with like difficult decisions are going to be made does feel
yeah.
threatening. Yeah, I get that. So I think
It's like when somebody tells you they want to talk to you next week,
right.
and then you got the whole weekend to worry
The
about.
panic. Yes. Yeah.
It's like, I don't like that. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think it goes back to, I mean, like this should be, ingrained and intertwined with all the ways that we're communicating about this, about whether it's a staff satisfaction survey or a stay interview, is like, like naming it as a stay interview, I do think is a really powerful way of saying like, I'm asking these questions because I want to keep you, is very different than like, I'm asking questions because I need to make some difficult decisions. Yeah, Christine.
Is there any sort of a template or guideline about how to approach a state interview so that there won't be, even the person conducting the interview won't say things like, in order to keep you or to maintain something, so that it won't feel so negative?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can I'll put in the discussion board some links to some articles from that, like the guy who does this, Dick Finnegan, who's like, he's the king of stay interviews. I can put some articles from him and like how to really conduct these in that way. I do think that it's important, again, like as Suzanne discussed, according to Mr. Finnegan, like there are, what is it, five specific questions, and that's all you need. And so there isn't a ton of that like follow-up. Here, I'll put those questions in the chat too. Of course, like there are different schools of thought. He's just the main one, of course. But yeah, I do think that, especially since, as I mentioned, we're encouraging managers and supervisors to be the ones asking those questions, they need some like training, and maybe it's practice and like doing practice with folks of like, okay, we're gonna just role play and I'm gonna be your interviewee and I'm gonna pretend to be someone completely different. And if those things kind of come up, if someone says like, what can we do to keep you, which puts, like you said, kind of puts in their mind that they might be wanting to leave, then you can coach that person and say like, no, we don't want to be leading these folks. We're really this is just about gaining information that will help us starting today to make sure that this person is retained and stays. But yeah, I think a big part of it is communicating about the purpose in advance. And again, that goes for stay interviews and staff satisfaction surveys of like, we're asking you this because we care enough to get your opinion so that we can make this a better place for you, as opposed to like, we're asking this because we're struggling or whatever. I think so much of it is about framing it as like, your organization sees you as a real whole person and wants to make things as good as we can for you. Of course, there are limits to that. We are, we have our deliverables that we need to do. We are here, our mission is to serve patients, but we want to make sure that we are doing everything within our power to recognize you as a whole person. And that includes both getting, that quantitative data as well as having these qualitative conversations about how we can maintain this relationship. So yeah, I'll continue to post some of that in the discussion board too. Let me just make a note. I don't know if has anyone on the call done stay interviews? Besides the bad things that happened at Catherine's organization. No. Okay. So yeah, I've participated in them, and yeah, I think it was just like really communicated early on what the purpose was, the time that it was going to take, and it was very, I think another important thing that I'm sure Suzanne mentioned is to keep them really separate from like evaluation time and make sure that they're like, it's really clear that they're not at all tied to performance evaluation, either of the supervisor or of the employee. Like this is a totally different kind of conversation, and it will have no impact on, your ability to get a promotion or a raise or anything like that. It's a totally different kind of conversation. So I think that's another thing. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to clear communication, and intentional communication, and thinking really clearly about that. Any other questions or thoughts before we wrap up for the Learning Collaborative? All right, well, I'll give you back about 15 minutes of your day. Again, we would love to stay in touch across these next 3 to 6 months as stuff comes up. If there's anything we can do to help make sure that things are getting implemented, help with any kinds of questions, I'll post what I mentioned to the discussion board, and please feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for participating. We hope to see you on future Star Center offerings and learning collaboratives. And we hope you have a wonderful holiday season. It snowed in Colorado, not for the first time, but the first time since I wasn't here at the first time. So I feel like it's officially the holiday season once it starts to snow. So happy holidays, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.